The problem in schools does need to get addressed. Every classroom in America has a rainbow flag or a progress pride flag or whatever. They all look like barcodes to me at this point. Point being is, what about this flag? How many of you guys have ever seen one of these? The reason I'm asking is because viewpoint discrimination is very clear. You can't censor one person's view on a topic if it's being spoken about at all. You're going to talk about gay stuff, you can talk about straight stuff. So let's say you go to school, ask a teacher to hang up one of these in the classroom next to the pride flag. They're going to probably say no. But let's just say that they didn't know any better. So you need to educate them. And you give them a packet full of case law that lays out very clearly their obligations under federal law and what is required of them as a government entity or in public schools. And then you go back the next day and ask them to hang the flag up again. Well, at that point, if they say no, that's intentional discrimination because you put them on notice of their obligations. And that could give rise to punitive damages. I've seen cases go for anywhere between $300,000 to $1.1 million. And it just so happens I have a packet full of this information, case law, laying it out very, very clearly on my website. So you can go to our website, yoderlavalia.com or yoderesq.com, both under the resource tab, and get your packet. Download it for free. Go to school, ask them to hang up one of these, see what they say. If they say no, give them the packet. If they say no again, sue them. Pretty simple. Let's see what happens.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about this extremely disturbing video of this teacher that is going viral, of him basically declaring that he is going to teach kids about whatever he wants to teach kids about in the classroom. He's going to hang up the pride flag. He's going to push whatever woke agenda in school that he wants on children, including teaching them about Marxism and LGBTQ history, black history, queer history. And I want to talk about this because this is basically an ad for homeschooling, right? And school choice here in America. Now, this video does involve a teacher out in Canada. Now, Canada is, more liberal than the United States. But, that's the direction that we're headed in, right? That's where Democrats want to take us. They want us to be like Europe. They want us to be like Canada, okay? And this is the type of stuff that Democrats are pushing in schools. And they think that it's appropriate for kids to learn about this stuff and to have these types of teachers in the classroom that are indoctrinating children. Take a look.
The flag behind me seems to really trigger a lot of snowflakes. And yes, I am your worst nightmare. So let's get one thing clear. If you have a problem that I have this flag in my classroom, stop following me right now. Just block me. Or better yet, leave a comment so I know who I can block. Because I will never stop supporting the rights of all individuals to be loved for who they are. And yes, I do teach about stuff like this in my classroom. Thank you for asking. I teach about Marxism. I teach about socialism. I teach about trans rights. I teach about LGBTQ history. I teach about black history. I teach about the racial history of our country and the genocide that we have inflicted upon indigenous people. I teach about redlining and Africville and the Starlight Tours. I teach about the history of Sir John A. Macdonald. I teach about wealth inequality in Canada and the concentration of wealth in the 1%. I talk about the prevalence of LGBTQ and trans people in millennial and Gen Z generations and compare it to left-handedness. I teach about intersectionality. I teach about the Polytechnic Massacre. I teach about the 60s scoop. And do you want to know why I teach about these things? Because they are important and because they are related to the curriculum. I do not push anything on my students. All I do is show them the world that we live in. The one thing I could be argued of pushing on my students, if anything, is that we should all be loved and respected for who we are. And because of the courses that I teach, all of this can be connected to curriculum. But beyond that, in Ontario, under the Education Act, teachers essentially have the right to teach whatever they think is beneficial to their students. There is obviously a boundary to that, but what I talk about in my classroom, what I do in my classroom, will not break any of the rules. Just because you're a triggered snowflake who can't handle gay people existing does not mean that what I am doing is by any means wrong. It just means that you're an antiquated dinosaur, and sooner or later your children will think to themselves, why does my parent think that way? Why does my parent act that way? Why does my parent talk that way? Because sooner or later, whether it's in school or out there in the real world, they will understand and acknowledge that there are adults who love and respect all people regardless of how they were born, and they will wonder why you don't.
Yeah, so you seen that, you heard that. Okay, so this woke teacher is essentially declaring any parent that does not want their child learning about LGBTQ rights and trans rights and Marxism and communism and queer history and all these things that, by the way, I'm not sure are appropriate to be learning in high school, because this guy allegedly is a teacher at a secondary school. So we're talking about grades 9 through 12. Okay, we're talking about, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, right? If you don't want this woke agenda, which again is not just, the pride stuff, not just the LGBTQ stuff, but also we're talking about communism, Marxism. If you don't want this stuff pushed down your kid's throat, then you are a triggered snowflake, right? And apparently all of that stuff has to do with the curriculum. This is what kids should be learning in school. It's amazing stuff, right? It's like I try to tell you guys all the time. Why is it that you see all of these different so-called oppressed groups, right? They're all on board with one thing, right? The same thing, which is Marxism and communism, right? The goal is to usher in Marxism and communism because through the intersectionality of oppression, these people basically have come together, right, in solidarity to overthrow capitalism. Okay, that's how you get all these groups to come together, like indigenous groups, black people, LGBTQ people, Muslims, etc. Right? You're seeing the same type of thing, right? The same pattern over and over and over again, right? I just want to point that out because I want you guys to understand what a lot of this stuff really is about. It's not really about so-called social justice, okay, or LGBTQ rights or trans rights or rights for oppressed people. What it's actually really about is ushering in Marxism and communism under the disguise of, fighting for the oppressed, right? Or fighting for civil rights or trans rights or LGBTQ rights or whatever, right? That's really what it's about, okay? That's what it's about. It's a Trojan horse to usher in communism, okay? Same patterns across the board. But what's fascinating to me is that there are actually some people in this country, right? Parents in this country, liberal parents in this country, that agree with this, okay? And one of the reasons why I'm doing this video is because recently I had a conversation with some liberal parents who live in the South, right? And they just so happen to be white. And we were having a casual conversation. Now, they didn't know who I was. They didn't know that I do political commentary for a living. They didn't know that I'm conservative, that I don't agree with this type of stuff. And the conversation came up about what is happening in schools, particularly this group, these parents did not like what Republicans were doing in their state in regards to cracking down on these woke ideologies being taught in school. Like, again, for example, trying to teach kids about, sex and gender in schools, trying to push this woke ideology down kids' throats in schools. They said that, well, we don't like that, okay, because we have a child and we want our child to be exposed to all different points of view. We want them to learn about all different types of people because we feel like the community that we live in is not diverse enough. AKA is too white, too many Trump supporters, too Christian. And we want to raise our kids in a way in which they get exposed to this type of stuff. Okay, so I basically challenged them and I said, well, look, here's the thing. I think it's the parents' responsibility to teach kids about this stuff if that's what they want their kids to be exposed to. Like, I understand the argument that, hey, you feel like maybe, just maybe, your kids aren't getting a diverse enough experience with other groups of people, right? But again, that's something for you to teach your kids about. That's not necessarily something that the school should be pushing down their throat. And then I used the example of the fact that there are some books that are being pushed in school in order to, teach kids about tolerance and all this other stuff. That's not really about tolerance. It's actually pushing what, in my opinion, is an agenda that includes sexual images, right? Like, for example, books like Genderqueer, right? In which I pointed out, I said, look, well, you have books like Genderqueer that have sexual acts in them that are in schools. Basically, you have adult content, explicit adult content in schools that kids are being exposed to that I don't think is right. Okay, like I don't think that it's right to expose kids to adult content in the name of teaching them not to hate gay people, right? Like, again, that's the parents' job to teach kids not to hate gay people. It's not the school's job to do that, and they can't do that through pushing books on them that have explicit content, or you have, actual depictions of sexual acts. And the response to my argument, the man, right, the father, he said, well, maybe it shouldn't be in the classroom, but I think it should be in the library, right? I think that those books should be in the library. And I couldn't believe it, right? Like, my mind was blown. I was like, wait, do liberals actually think this way? Do they actually think that it's okay to basically have these explicit books in schools, right? I think they should be in the library. I don't know if they should be put in class, but I think they should be in the library so that kids can have access to it, right? I couldn't believe my ears. And then it got worse. It got worse because then after that, the woman that I was talking to, she said that, well, I want to take my daughter to a drag show, right? I want to take her to a drag show. Okay. So she was talking about how disappointed she was, or how afraid she was that she couldn't take her kid to a drag show without being judged for it, right? Without facing some type of backlash, because, conservatives have a basically backlash against the fact that you do have parents that are taking their kids to drag shows, being exposed to, explicit adult entertainment, that, in my opinion, is just not for kids. And that conversation really made me realize just how cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs insane some parents are in this country when it comes to these issues, right? Like, they really do believe that their kids should be exposed to explicit adult content. They don't care that their kids are being exposed to this type of stuff, and they want kids to learn about this stuff in school, right? They think that these types of teachers are actually helping kids be less hateful, right? Or more tolerant of gay people and, diverse points of view, or, other races or whatever. When the reality is that that's not the case. Actually, I will argue that these types of teachers are actually making kids be more resentful, intolerant of different points of view, because that's essentially a trademark of the modern day liberal, which is intolerance towards viewpoints that they disagree with. Okay. And I go even further than that and argue that, again, these types of teachers, they actually create more resentment and hate than they prevent, right? Like, for example, when you're teaching about critical race theory, you are teaching it with the purpose of creating resentment and hate towards whites. Okay. Or when you're pushing this far left woke agenda, when you're talking about, LGBTQ rights and trans rights and how oppressed they are, maybe you're creating some type of resentment towards straight people, or creating resentment towards Christians, right? Or making kids hate capitalism. Okay. When you talk about Marxism and communism, when you're pushing this stuff down kids' throats, that's the goal, right? The intended goal from these teachers is to basically indoctrinate these kids into their political and woke ideologies. And these woke ideologies, the trademark, the hallmark of these woke ideologies is intolerance towards different points of view. That's why we see so much political violence in our country from young left-wing extremists, because they've been taught to be intolerant of things that they disagree with, right? Like, for example, being intolerant of whites, or being intolerant of Christians, or being intolerant of Trump supporters, or being intolerant of conservatives. Okay. That's what they're being taught. And that's why, again, a vast majority of the political violence that you see in this country comes from left-wing extremists who are young and indoctrinated, because they've been taught in school by teachers like this to actually be hateful, right? But again, if you ask the teachers, they say, oh, no, we're just trying to teach kids to accept everybody, right? But again, they actually really are not doing that. They're actually teaching kids to dislike people, or to be less tolerant of people that disagree with them politically, right? That's what's happening here. That's the irony. But I think it goes without saying that teachers like this shouldn't be in school, right? You shouldn't have teachers like this teaching this type of stuff in school. It's not your job. It's the parents' job. And, when you live in a country where you have kids that are failing Okay, like they can't even do basic reading, writing, and math, but this is the type of stuff they're pushing in school. Again, this creates opportunity for Republicans that I don't think that they're taking advantage of enough, right? They're not having enough conversations about the education crisis in this country, right? I mean, again, kids can't read, write, do math, but again, this is what they're learning in school, and we're not being loud enough about that, right? We're not being loud enough about the crisis that's going on in education. Again, a system that is run almost entirely by liberals, and how that has completely failed our children, and it's failing our country. Kids, again, they know all about this woke stuff, but again, they can't even do the basics in regards to what they actually are going to school to learn. Again, it's a complete disaster, and it guarantees that our country, again, is going to fall off a cliff. I mean, it already has fallen off a cliff. We're not going to be able to compete in the future when all of our kids are woke and dumb, right? But they can't really do anything else outside of protest, right? Again, it's not good for the future. It's really not. But let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.